Mussolini never visited Asmara. But ironically, his vision for the city had largely already taken shape, and has remained that way ever since. During Edward Denison's journey through Asmara's architecture, one question nagged at him. These buildings, though beautiful, are cruel reminders of colonialism, segregation, and violence. Many nations in Africa, once shorn of colonialism, tend to destroy its reminders. But Eritreans did not. Why?
That is in the past, and it should be preserved, not only as a heritage and as a legacy of what has taken place, but also as a resource. And in a country like Eritrea, which is a very poor country, the buildings are a resource, if nothing else, but also for the story that it tells about the ancestors of those that live there now. And the Eritreans are very proud about that. Their fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers had put the labour into creating those buildings. It might have been designed during a fascist period, but it was the Eritreans that, and their blood and sweat and tears that actually constructed those buildings.
After World War II, the British administered Eritrea alongside Ethiopia.
And when the war ended, it was decided that the former Italian colonies, including Eritrea, were to bear the responsibility of the four great powers, and the British were to become a caretaker government.
After the war, Haile Selassie was viewed as a hero by many in the West for his resistance to the Axis. But Selassie also had ideas about Eritrea and friends at the newly created United Nations. He struck a deal, one that would sow the seeds for generations of conflict. In 1952, the UN voted for a federation between Ethiopia and Eritrea. It seemed fair at the time, but Eritrea soon realized that the fine print worked against them.
Eritrea became an autonomous unit, federated to Ethiopia, under the sovereignty of the Ethiopian crown. So there was no federal government set. The Ethiopian government became the federal government. It was called the federation. Then Eritreans started to realize that they were gypped.
If the Eritreans felt gypped in the federation, it would get worse. In 1961, Haile Selassie dissolved the federation. The next year, he annexed Eritrea. This would touch off a 30-year resistance movement that would one day be called the best guerrilla army in the world.
These 100-foot-long depots will be completed and buried within 10 days. Hidden in the hills, camouflaged in the valleys throughout Eritrea, is a complex maze of underground workshops, supply dumps, garages, hospitals, schools, and other support.
This rare footage from the 1970s shows the subterranean life of Eritrea's independence movement, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. Since 1961, the guerrillas had been resisting Haile Selassie's rule, and by the 1970s was squirreled away in the mountains, living underground and slowly recapturing territory. But in addition to fighting the Ethiopian army, the EPLF created its own subterranean government.
It was a practice government, yes. It wanted, what do you replace it with? I mean, whatever it is that you're opposing, what do you replace it with? And from 1976, 77, 78, the liberation fronts had almost liberated the whole of Eritrea except for 4 or 5 towns.
Local knowledge of the rugged terrain made it easier for the Eritreans to gain and hold territory, and to put the territory they held to use. The very first thing the fighters started was a school.
During our army struggle, we started our schooling in 1976. We call it Zero School. Zero School or Revolution School.
I happened to be one of the founders of that school, the Revolution School. We used to call it the Zero School. It was the code name for it.
This Revolution School has contained or accommodated children of the fighters, of displaced people, of the people who live around that area, liberated area. This school acted as prototype where we developed our curriculum without any help.
Little by little, the fighters created a functioning society literally underground, complete with hospitals, factories, and road and vehicle networks.
Little industries cropped up everywhere, all sorts of things. We didn't have shoes, so we started to produce shoes in the field. A pharmaceutical factory was established out there, and the semblance of a government, complete with its financial section, administrative section, and so on, developed out there.
Running an underground government means multitasking. Schools and health programs were run in tandem,
while an underground section nearby fits new stocks to captured or damaged weapons.
Machine shops rebuilt captured Ethiopian weaponry, or melted them down to make ammunition of their own. It happened mostly underground and mostly at night. The fighters had no international allies and faced in Ethiopia, a country 20 times its size. Yet somehow, the Eritreans were winning. By 1977, the fighters could, if they dared a daylight foray, see the city of Asmara, held by a 10,000-man Ethiopian garrison. They had come to the gates of their capital. But then, stalemate. The Ethiopians mounted an offensive and the fighters withdrew. It would take another 16 years for the fighters to achieve independence. The Soviet Union supported Ethiopia. The U.S. was aloof. The Eritreans, given little chance of success, received no international aid for their fight. Yet their resourcefulness allowed the Eritreans to keep their underground government running almost indefinitely, while Ethiopia's problems, like famine and the fall of their allies in the Soviet Union, piled up. Through it all, the fighters kept chipping away. The BBC called them the best guerrilla army in the world.
It's a whole accumulation of all the kinds of things that were done. I mean, the little battles, the little guerrilla and other kinds of tactics that cut the fingers of the Ethiopian government.
Eventually, the grip of the Ethiopians slipped. The Eritreans retook its cities one by one. And by 1991, they finally took Asmara. A small group of fighters had fought off a nation 20 times its size and seized its independence.
Everything that went into winning that war, everything, all the philosophy, all this education that we're talking about, all the little factories and things, all the effort, the whole effort, and the support that the whole of the population was giving the EPLF made me realize that at last we've got it.
In 1993, there was a United Nations brokered referendum on independence for Eritrea. The vote was 99% yes. Eritrea became a sovereign nation and a member of the UN. Now, Eritrea's practice government from underground was put into place. The Eritreans were now running their own country. It is Easter time in Asmara, and school children awaiting their first communion process down Liberation Avenue in Asmara. Within half a mile of this spot are several Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant churches, several mosques, and a synagogue. How could a small land of 9 different ethnic groups and languages, half Christian and half Muslim, hang together for 30 years of war, then live together without internal turmoil? Father Abraha Bokru is pastor of the Cathedral of St. Mary in Asmara, and to him, the reason does not go back 30 years or 100 years. It goes back to biblical times.
You see that, for example, a good, smooth understanding between Christians and Muslims, and with the Christians themselves also, a good understanding and living together, you can notice here. And this is because I think of a lot of Jewish cultural elements before the 4th century which were well inculturated into the family, society, mind, spirit.
The people of Eritrea and Ethiopia are Semitic, part of the ancient family of languages that descended from the time of Christ. Languages such as Aramaic, Canaanite, Akkadian, and also some of the languages still widely spoken today in Ethiopia and Eritrea, Tigrinya, Tigray, Arabic. Then, these parts of Eritrea and Ethiopia were called Aksum, and was claimed to be the home of the Ark of the Covenant, and ruled by the Queen of Sheba. In the 4th century AD, Aksum became the first major empire to convert to Christianity. Others followed. But when Islam came to the region in the 7th century, it didn't fully replace Christianity. Instead, the two major religions grew side by side in this land. That history of coexistence is in the blood of the Eritrean people and has held up under stress.
In fact, in major Muslim areas, Christians were being protected by their neighbors, and the same thing was happening in the Christian areas. Muslims were being protected. I mean, people didn't follow the lead of their political parties and kill each other. They didn't do that. They stayed away. And this tendency to move back and maintain all the relationships has been characteristic of the Eritrean society to this date.
In the highland, where they have Orthodox Christians, Catholics, and Protestants, they have a good, normal, they invite each other, they take part also in any social work or activity or family. For example, when there is wedding, when there is a funeral, somebody dies, then everybody takes part. So his religion remains intact, but he becomes part of the religious and social life. Therefore, they are invited in our feasts. We are also invited to take part in their feasts. The religion remains within the compound or the church or the mosque.
There is no question about it. There is an air of serenity to Eritreans. That serenity is reflected in its capital, Asmara.
To have reached Asmara, I think, meant something very, very special. And that's deep down in the Eritrean psyche. So I think physically and metaphorically, Asmara means a tremendous amount to Eritrea and Eritreans.